All right. I hope that everyone can hear me. I think we can give it a start. I still see some people joining and registering, but I think we can kick it off. Am I audible, first of all? You could just type or unmute yourself and let me know. Loud and clear. Thank you, Barry. Thank you for joining again, everyone. Good to see you. Good to see some familiar faces there. So hopefully we can be more, let's say, proactive. We're not a big group today, but let's get started. So we've done some series around this specific topic, around detection response. So today we want to address a more advanced topic when it comes to SAP, where we are trying to actively hunt, detect, and then finally respond to SAP threats. So I could see that we have a mix of great attendees from the different cybersecurity teams, whether it is around IR, threat hunters. I see there, to your different SAP security guys, not just authorization and identity access management. So the content will be a mix of the different basics for the SAP security guys to understand in more perspective on how to create or not create, but do incident response activities, threat hunting, some sort of threat detections for cybersecurity teams. It is going to at least understand some of the gaps that some of these environments when it comes to SAP has, what kind of use cases can be built, and so on. So hopefully there's something for everyone within this talk. It's definitely not enough, but it is a start. So if you do not know me by now, my name is Wasim Ajrab. I'm leading the advisory at NoMonkey. Before joining NoMonkey, or when NoMonkey started, I've been within the advisory team. I was doing the cybersecurity, or I was on the side of the cybersecurity, a lot of SOC, offensive security, and now moved towards SAP in the last couple of years, around 6-7 years, to introduce, not just to introduce this, but to bring these concepts into SAP security. So I do not focus on authorization and identity access management. I do focus on helping a lot of SOC teams, creating use cases, doing detection, incident response, conducting offensive security activities against those, doing purple teams. So more of these activities in terms of what we do, and of course what we do as a team inside advisory. As you guys all know, or if you haven't been here, this session will be recorded. Then it will be shared to our YouTube, LinkedIn channels. Once you have any questions at the end, please unmute yourself if you feel comfortable. If not, please post it on the chat. I will try to keep an eye on it as we go. But if you want to, keep tabs on us and see what other coming events we are doing or sessions we are doing on a monthly basis with tackling SAP security together, please sign up through this QR code. You can find it. You can find all of this information on our website, but if that makes it easier for you. We've also recently published 2 blogs. A third one is coming around this specific topic, around threat hunting in SAP environment. So we've discussed, or we've released a blog around building a robust SAP security monitoring program, which was also in our last tackling SAP security together. I think that was in January we did that, and then the alerts to insights, or the incident response in that perspective, which we will going to combine today with the threat hunting topic. So after this session, in the next few days, we'll also release a blog around specifically around threat hunting, just to get you started in different areas. What is it? What concepts can you utilize? How to think about it, and from that perspective. So we will look into some of these areas right now as we go through our session today. Just a quick recap from January on building this robust SAP security, I would say, a SOC framework, some takeaways, some key information that we have discussed together. First thing here is we want to try to identify those different gaps that you have, whether it is around your processes, your controls, the technology. When it comes to SOC, or when it comes to also incident response or threat hunting, data sources are critical, are most important when you want to create some sort of story behind what you are trying to investigate, what you're trying to detect, what you're trying to identify. So technology, or at least the different areas within your environment that you are unable to see, this is where these gaps are definitely necessary to be identified. Now, an important part here, you guys, as I said in the beginning, you're a mix of your cybersecurity teams, you're a mix of SAP professionals. So people enablement is really critical. I've seen a lot of teams in that perspective, which, from a cybersecurity team, they don't understand to some extent the different SAP terminologies, not just the terminologies, but also the systems, the components, the different proprietary protocols used. So to actually create a methodology or a hypothesis, which we want to see within threat hunting, might be quite difficult if they cannot, if they don't know what they're looking for, if they don't know what kind of data sources provide what, and vice versa. When we are talking about, SAP professionals here, they are not equipped in incident response strategies or activities. They're not equipped unless, you come from where I came in terms of cybersecurity and then jump into SAP. But in general, people enablement is quite critical. We have seen that, without building proper use cases, your entire incident response, even if you have those magnificent alerts from your different tools that collect SAP logs, it might not quite be, efficient, because at the end of the day, you are going to forward it to your SAP department, where they need to investigate the stuff. And this is where some of these challenges might also arise. So we also saw that, deriving actual or clear roles and responsibilities in most of these areas are quite necessary. Here, we're talking about who does what in certain areas for your playbooks, for your workflows. These are necessary areas that you need to define. Quite quickly moving forward, to put this gap, or at least to start, removing those silos between SAP and your cybersecurity teams, the MITRE attack is one source that can definitely improve on this, whether to use it as an intelligence source, to get an idea of the different tactics, techniques, and procedures being used out there, and applying it to your own environment. That gives you an edge in terms of where you can start, even for your SAP system. So we will see some examples down the line, how that can be utilized, how that can be also built. And finally, this is going to be repeated throughout this session. While you are creating, once you create, you need to test it. You just don't just push it, test, tune, and also automate. We'll speak about automation a little bit. I know it can be difficult in SAP environments, but it might be also possible in that perspective. So this was an overview of your SAP security framework we did in January. And now we can kick it off directly with our topic today. So a quick overview in that perspective. I like to usually put out some myths around SAP security. Today's myths is all about SAP SOC myths in that perspective. So if you are not new to SAP, you've heard, or you are not new to SAP, you've heard about security audit logs. So we've heard a lot that security audit logs provide everything that an organization needs to identify or detect, certain threats. Now, that's completely wrong. We'll see certain use cases that enable you that security audit logs are sometimes not used. When it comes to pre-built use cases, and these are definitely use cases that are offered by your modern tools, that enables us to your modern tools. So a problem with those pre-built use cases is that while they can be a good source of information to correlate different use cases, it might be quite difficult to respond or investigate certain use cases because of bad user practice. So if you take an example like critical extraction of table USR02, so that's a table for providing or at least maintaining user information, some B codes if they still exist or not, some information around the user. So if this table has been extracted, this happens on a normal basis. So how can we avoid, or how can we correlate those different cases when it comes to this specific use case or any other use case in that perspective? SAP team here, or the basis team, takes care of incident response. While I don't, doubt their knowledge and experience and professionalism, I doubt that incident response is in their sweet spot. So it is not, we cannot rely on that perspective. They still miss the idea of forensics, what to look for, what is needed, what kind of logs are available there. So the correlation, or at least working with the cybersecurity teams and the SAP basis teams, does create a major, or does create different advantages here when we are doing any kind of forensics or incident response activities. We've also heard that, business process use cases do not particularly bring value. And, I could argue that for the next 2-3 hours, but we'll see some use cases around business processes that will enable you to see that there might be worth to look into, worth to actually mature your use case around, or use cases around SAP when it comes to monitoring the threats or so on, when it involves critical business processes. And of course, the last two are my favorites, and I repeat them quite often. A lot of people think that, German made, secure by default. Why do we need to monitor it? Why do we need to have those protocols there? We are okay. If we can't see anything happening, then that black box can stay as a black box, and we don't want to see it. And then finally, I think this is a topic that everyone touches base on. It's now in the cloud. So somebody else is monitoring it. I don't need to worry about it. I don't need to worry about all of these different, detections, threats, and so on. Unfortunately, and fortunately for me as an advisory, it brings a lot of other challenges when it comes to the cloud. So another, more technology is introduced here. A lot of other areas can be definitely monitored by your organization. So even if it's in the cloud, please read the fine print when it comes to your SAP Rise, your SAP Grow. There's a lot of information there that SAP provides that tells you that you still have a lot of things to do, other than, learning new technology when it comes to the cloud area. So these are some SAP SOC myths. In my previous videos, you'll see some SAP security myths. Some of them, of course, they're different, but the last two are always constant in that perspective. So what are the challenges that we usually see when it comes to IR, or when it comes to incident response, when it comes to detection, or when it comes to threat hunting, when it comes for SAP environments? Now, one area is definitely lack of comprehensive use cases. As I said, pre-built use cases are fine. They're good to actually get, but you need to still monitor your other areas of, or let's say network areas of SAP systems. So your IT landscape here is definitely a necessity when it comes to certain use cases. You want to understand an entire story. You don't want to just understand it from an SAP perspective. So these are the specific challenges we see for organizations having. It's definitely SAP monitoring is resource intensive. So, enabling even read access logs, or enabling other logs that can utilize a lot of resources. There's a lot of different methods when it comes to those resource utilization, or at least utilizing logs. It all has to do with the different use cases. So these are some of the challenges in that perspective. One critical, or one complex challenge is when it comes to custom code and add-ons. So these are definitely introducing more difficulties when we are detecting threats, but it's not impossible. Your initial strategy would definitely be cleaning them out. But there are certain areas where, when it comes to specifically third-party extensions or at least integrations, it might take time to resolve, but still you are using this third-party namespaces or whatever in your production where you're utilizing it on a daily basis and where it is quite critical. So there are ways to put detection mechanisms around that. There are ways to build use cases around that. And that is all boils down to your business process use cases. And this is where we'll touch base in the next few slides when it comes to that. And then finally, when it comes to, two more points, incident response. Here, it's not quite done properly when it comes to SAP. You know, I've seen some workflows or at least playbooks that directly do an administrative action in terms of raising it to an authorization team, raising it to probably SAP basis to do further investigation. But then this alert would be repeating, or it will alert you on a daily basis 30, 40 times, and then eventually you get fed up with it and then, you know, kill it. So we haven't done anything here, basically. So when it comes to incident response, there's still that gap when moving all of these alerts for investigation by your SAP different teams in that perspective. So that's an important part here when it comes to IR. And then finally, your traditional, we talked about this, traditional monitoring tools definitely do struggle to provide this comprehensive visibility. But this is specifically for SAP. So when you are correlating different use cases, whether it is around, you know, you're picking it up from the different monitoring tools that are available out there, and then, you know, dumping it in your SIM, you still need to create those use cases where you can actually then create that comprehensive overview or at least detection capabilities in that perspective. So these are some of the challenges we see. Of course, there is more to talk about, but I think these are quite unique as we usually see them on a regular basis. To jump a little back towards what we've been speaking about in terms of the SOC framework, an important part is definitely strategy. I know that this is not the thing that is really required. I mean, not required, but is not really something that you like to work with, but definitely strategizing around your SOC, around your IR, threat hunting is definitely needed. So you cannot, as anyone in security has ever said, you cannot defend what you do not know exists. So this also is in line with what you have in SAP. So whether you are doing your assessments to identify those different gaps, creating that maturity to where you want to reach, your team enablement, we've directly addressed how this is really important when it comes to improving your detection capabilities, and finally your technical implementation. So when we are summarizing it, we want to understand where you are, where you actually want to go. Are you able to actually do that kind of strategy? Are you able to reach that maturity level with the team that is existing there? And finally, how can you do that? So we'll start with the incident response, then take it to threat hunting, and from there, we'll open it up, hopefully, to some questions in a little while. So we want to try to answer some of these questions, but also we want to try to now apply them directly to some sort of incident response activities, engagement, some sort of threat hunting areas. And there is no better way to do that with questions. So I've been doing these kinds of activities for quite some time now. And even in offensive security, your mentality to get actual good results is that are based off of excellent questions or good questions. So what do I mean in that persistence is that within the entire process from, you know, detection to threat hunting to whatever, it's all about answering and asking the right questions. Even when it comes to, you know, building your SOC, is about answering those right questions. So without those questions that enable you to detect or at least investigate, without those questions that have been, you know, raised, you cannot get the proper results without actually, you know, answering them. So throughout all of this, I like to apply this kind of statement here that, you know, with good questions, there are good results. There is better questions, and then there are better results, and so on and so forth. So let's try to apply this first of all, in our incident response area or alerts, at least to insights. I just want to cover for those there that are new to incident response around how the investigation process at least looks like. And I know this is a very a simplified capture of an investigation process, but it does help you understand what do I mean by those questions. So initially, any kind of alarm directly drives certain decisions. So these decisions enable you to do triaging. So you want to get rid of certain false positives. You want to concentrate at least on some true positives. And from there, proceed further to that collection. So another alarm or that same alarm would then probably drive further collection. When I talk about collection, I'm talking about information. What information relates to that specific alert, which information it's actually you want to investigate, the data sources here, what are available data sources that can be beneficial for this investigation. So do you have logs for your web dispatcher? Do you have logs for your SAP router? Do you have logs for your message server? All of these kind of information will help you or at least enable you to properly drive a proper decision. Because at the end of the day, when you reach a level where you are responding to a certain alarm or certain incident, you need to ask yourself and try to answer these questions. Of course, here, what kind of data sources help drive decisions making, of certain incidents? And then finally, any kind of known incidents. Can this be closed based on known criteria? So all of this alarm or the incident that happened, there are certain criterias. Can I actually close it or not? This is a very simplified investigation process that helps you quickly navigate towards what you want to investigate and is it a false positive or is it not? Now, when you are coming to an SAP environment, in the current tools that are used for SAP threat detection, there's a lot of false positives. Now, from a threat perspective, so the threats that are being alerted, they're actually correct, but they are basically from bad user practices. So it's quite legitimate, but not considered bad. But at the same time, is it a threat or not? So there is a lot of positives in that perspective. So it is quite a nightmare when you are releasing those alerts or use cases to your SOC and your IR team has to investigate those. I'm pretty sure that they're going to just shut it down. So this green check, it doesn't mean it's a good thing. It does not represent a good thing. It just means that there is a lot of false positives when it comes to detecting threats with most of the current tools at the moment. Of course, tuning, improving, color rating can definitely give an edge here when you are designing those use cases. But the main thing is that for any kind of alarm or at least decision driver or collection driver, you need to understand the data sources. So when it comes to incident response here, then I'm talking now from a different perspective, you need to understand what kind of data are you picking up from these SAP systems, from this network or at least proprietary different protocols that you can capture to some extent. We usually see that when there are certain definitely use cases or alerts that have been configured, the IR team usually forwards it directly to your SAP team. I think we touched base on that previously. So when forensics and IR activities for the SAP team might not be the sweet spot or their capabilities. So here we then lose on actually doing any kind of investigation or incident response when it comes to SAP. And this, when it comes to people enablement, this is where the most critical part comes into play. So we haven't yet gone through investigating it. We haven't yet gone through any kind of data sources collection, any kind of information that we want to do, anything from that perspective. So this is a major challenge we see here, and it can be easily, definitely, easily, I think, is a very big word, which I can say, but on the ground, it can be quite difficult to put into place. But we have seen several organizations that actually have this process down to a T in that perspective. To give you a small example, and maybe I could ask the audience here, as we are just trying, oh, 17 people. Okay, so maybe we can ask later, but I'm happy to hear your thoughts. When you are having an incident in that perspective. So this is a business process use case. This is order to cash. So what we're trying to do here is that we want to understand why a certain incident where a suspicious attacker or maybe an insider threat used certain excessive privileges to manipulate, the entire process. So whether it is, changing customer credit limits or, doing any kind of unauthorized orders, triggering illegitimate invoices to different locations, and in general, bypassing your entire approval process. So when an incident response professional sees this kind of alert, of course, you're going to send it to your SAP team. Your SAP team needs to investigate it thoroughly. So the question here, what areas would you investigate? And I'd like to hear more. Now I will show you, but I'd like to hear more within your comments to see how you can investigate certain areas of this order to cash. Now, you can look into, when it comes to that, some compromised users, high privileges, irregular postings, you name it, changes in certain tables, malicious user activities, remote function calls, different indicators of compromise from the infrastructure. But all this kind of investigation you need to do in correlation or in correlation with your cybersecurity team. So I'm now talking to the SAP team and vice versa. Without that, it might be quite impossible. So with your tools that collect only SAP kind of logs and pre-built use cases there, it might be quite difficult actually to investigate such a process. So what would be our incident response plan here? Do we just isolate the system, taking into consideration this is a production system, and if it goes down, you might lose a lot of money? Do we, suspend the account? Where did this account come from? Do we, do some sort of look into some sort of authorization? Do we escalate this to who? Our basis team or authorization team or development team? Do they have to do anything with this? Are we actually going to suspend financial transactions? And I mean, that's a big one when you are suspending financial transactions for a business who does so many orders during a day. It means you're losing a lot of money in that perspective. So this kind of use case is quite interesting. Now, we will see when we come to threat hunting how we can break down this kind of use case. We can start proactively looking for such areas, not just looking, but actually testing it out to determine whether we are able to detect it. We are able, if not, then let's find ways to detect it. If we are, then what can we do afterwards in terms of whether it is automated incident response or at least a playbook where investigation is involved in that matter. And that's the key here, what we're trying to reach when it comes to incident response and when it comes to threat hunting. Just a quick overview here. Some of the data sources that will enable you to actually catch something like this should be a combination of both your application level. So here we're talking about read access logs, change logs, whether it is around documents, whether it is around tables, and security audit logs. Probably system logs can help you, and then the different infrastructure level logs. So we're talking about, I haven't put here web dispatcher logs, but you name it. So you can look into the different infrastructure logs to actually create this sort of use cases when we are talking. So any kind of reports that you can create, whether it is violation reports, SODs, whatever you can call it. But we want to see how we can then break it down, try to address this within threat hunting activities. So when it comes to your IR team, enablement, I will always finish with enablement because it is quite important. It is important for them to understand, and this is people who do not have a clue about SAP, so they look at SAP as a black box. Your SAP security fundamentals is definitely necessary. Understanding your proprietary network protocols, or at least network security around SAP, is quite important, because when you design or when you draw a picture for your cybersecurity team, they will understand the different areas. Then it would be easy for them to actually address certain use cases to their SAP by particularly, picking and choosing those different alerts as they understand them. So concepts on how maybe to harden SAP systems. And I'm not talking about going in depth when it comes to different, profile parameters, what to do, but at least essential areas on how you can harden it for you to, at least apply some proactive measures, which I will provide later on. Look into interfaces, what are these interfaces? What risks do they have? How can you monitor them? How can you protect them? And then finally, ways of developing this skills around identifying, detecting, and responding to threats or incidents or alerts that are coming from your SAP environment. So as an entire process, when it comes to IR, definitely try to concentrate on your use cases. You then remove the need to actually enable everything when it comes to SAP. Start slow. Do not go overboard when it comes to these logs. There is a lot, as he said, it might affect your resources, it might not. But there are organizations that wouldn't turn on, for instance, read access logs, because it might consume a lot of resources. So create your playbooks based off of these use cases, create those workflows, test, and automate. Now, automate, as I said, just to touch base here, this can be tricky in SAP. Most of this might be automating actually administrative tasks, but there are certain use cases that you can fully automate. And an important part that when you are doing some sort of use cases, you cannot neglect your low staging application servers. So in an SAP, just as a reminder, you have 4 or 3 stages, depending on the organization. You have your development, quality, regression, pre-production, or production systems. Not most, but some organizations, I would say, they tend not to enable logging on their lower staging environments without any kind of security measures or protections. You could tell me that there is now, segregation of network segmentation. Fine, there is these security measures, fine, but there are areas where it is, privilege escalation or lateral movement when you are in an SAP system, when it's not properly configured, when you are utilizing, custom development and third-party add-ons or integrations that might be critical. It can be quite easy to actually do that jump from one staging level to the other staging level. So this is just something that also we quite see when it comes to logging or enabling logging based on use cases. Finally, when it comes to incident response, before I jump into threat hunting, roles and responsibilities are important. Testing is always necessary. Testing, you cannot test, as I said, you cannot test a use case without understanding whether it will alert or it will give you a proper alert or not. And when it comes to those strategies, threat scenarios are your best friend. And now we'll look at some threat hunting, basics, understanding of threat hunting, and finally some proactive measures that we are testing out. Those proactive measures. We've seen a lot of indicators, or how we understand attack surface is based off of these proactive measures. So based on our previous example, this is something that we will concentrate on, especially around the order to cash process when it comes to that area. We are going to see how threat hunting activities can help us actually define certain use cases and then test them and, of course, deploy them if it's possible. It might not be possible. So again, the better questions you have, the better results you get. Also applied in your threat hunting activities. Just looking at the time here, I think we are good to go. Let's look at an environment. I think most people have seen this kind of environment, or at least this is a very, very small environment when it comes to SAP. So from an attacker perspective, or at least just a few statements back, when we are trying to defend something, we usually tend to think in a list-based process. So we have our critical SAP systems, we have our critical authorizations, we have our integrations, ACLs, so on and so forth. So we are in somewhat way or another having an asset management that goes in our heads. Now, the attacker actually doesn't usually work that way. The minute they possess a foothold inside your company, they start exploring, they start doing discovery, they start doing persistence, privilege escalation, they start mapping network topology, access, and so on, so they can learn how everything is connected. And to understand that perspective when it comes to an attacker, this is how we are going to treat it. So what would an attacker do when it comes to your initial access or reconnaissance in that perspective? From there, whether you gain access through your VPN, let's say you get some VPN credentials or configuration, or you do some sort of phishing when it comes to that perspective. From there, the attacker will start understanding more. So there you will have discovery, you will have some sort of privilege escalation to your SAP application servers. Whether the SAP router is published, the port is published, you can get more information, your SAP routing table is there. So the attacker is particularly drawing a map or a network map towards what is available inside the environment. So this attacker can go from there to start doing some sort of persistence, lateral movement, exfiltration, you name it. So the attacker is sitting in your system for some time, or at least not your system, but in your environment for some time, to understand a lot of things going on. And now these are more, when it comes to targeted attacks, they would be very careful when they do that. Now, from your perspective as a defender, always think and try to answer certain elements or the following during your threat hunting activities. Where can you go next and how you can get there? I've tried to do this and I applied this to different use case building, or even when I'm doing some sort of offensive security with the team, we try to understand where we want to go and how we want to get there. So from that persistence, let's say we gained initial access through a phishing campaign or whatever it is. There are public available services that enabled us to reach that internal server. From there, we keep on going with understanding where do I want to go next and where do I want to get there. Now, the thing about you doing this kind of exercise is that you have a lot of answers already because it is your environment. You can be quite fast, you can be quite precise to some extent. I'm not saying that it's always 100% bulletproof, but you have those questions already in mind. So here you understand that we need to do some, we want to get to that application server. You continue, where do I want to go next? How do I want to get there? You can list so many possibilities in that perspective. And that what enables you to actually, create your hunting activities. This will enable you to create your use cases and test them out. So keep in mind those two questions: where to go next? Where can an attacker go next from a certain system or an identified system, an affected system, and how can they get there to the affected system? You can apply this to your defense strategy, you can apply this to your offense strategy, you can apply it to the different activities that we are discussing here today in our session. Two important questions, very simple, but two important questions. When we are looking at threat hunting, just before we dive into that use case and then some use cases to take away for you, some threat hunting key concepts here for people who are new to these threat hunting. So in general, what we want to do is actually make assumptions. We want to create that hypothesis that enables us to define some possible attacks that can affect our environment. We need to be realistic, of course, when it comes to hypothesis. So there are three drivers, or at least there are more, but there are three drivers that tend to be useful in that area. One is threat intelligence, situational awareness, and domain experts. When we are talking about threat intelligence, when it comes to SAP, it might be quite minimal. You can apply if you are looking at advanced persistent threats or at least attackers that do target ERP systems, it can be a beneficial area. I don't usually start when it comes to that persistence in threat intelligence. We try to define it from our situational awareness or at least environment experience domain expert. So when we are talking about situational awareness here, we are specifically looking for attack vectors that are based on data. So they are based on certain vulnerabilities that exist. They are based on processes that exist. They are based on, actual data that is inside our environment. And that enables us to define this hypothesis. Now, of course, when it comes to domain experts, talking with them, whether it is around your business and application owners, to define, or not to define, but to understand certain business processes, and from there, try to create use cases behind it. It is an important part. So we want to try to define what am I hunting for? How can we define this? How will we actually find this? And of course, we need to always keep it time bound. So we usually ask after these hypotheses, can we test this hypothesis? Can we make it actually reality? Can we reuse the certain parts of this hypothesis based on the different areas that we have collected? Does it need to be updated? Do we need to maintain it based on our environment changes or so on and so forth? So we want to try to be as objective as possible when it comes to developing these kinds of hypotheses. So we look into realistic. We said that, can we reuse it? Do we know that the data sources, the technology at our disposal, are technologies at our environment can be actually used? When we are talking about IOCs here, now, I don't like to lead, or they shouldn't be the formal lead of your entire investigation. They definitely help you. They definitely enable you to reach further investigations. They might be, good to be used in the context of actually defining or detecting certain areas, but they are not the all and all of everything. They might have certain areas where they can be not reusable anymore. So if you're talking about domain names, IP addresses in that perspective, they have a quite a shelf life to them. So I don't particularly, when we are creating certain hypotheses for threat hunting activities, we utilize them, but it's not the all and all in that perspective. Another important area, do you have the enough data to actually do that? Now, if you answer, all the positive answers here when it comes to those questions, this is where you start wanting to build your attack trees, your pathways, you name them, critical paths, whatever you want to define them. That would definitely help you in then testing, building, and maintaining this attack tree. Now, to give you an example of an attack tree, I've used the MITRE here attack flow project. Recently, I got to from a threat hunting team that has showcased this to me, which was amazing, and it helps a lot to define. So this is basically what you can finally then test out. This is half of the story here. This is not the entire thing, from a phishing campaign going into your SAP system. But this is how would you then define your attack flow, define your attack trees, test it out, test it in different perspective. You can define certain areas, but it can lead you to a place where you are doing actual threat hunting rather than waiting for things to happen at the end. So when it comes to that example we have talked about, order to cash, and now this is just as a scenario. So how can we break it down into hunting scenarios? It's quite simple when you look at the text. We will create one for unauthorized credit limit changes. We want to test that out. We want to create for any kind of fraudulent sale orders or any kind of invoices. And finally, for instance, you can list more, we want to test, bypassing those approval workflows. Those three different areas, if you are testing them, defining where these data sources can come out from, mapping out an entire attack flow, or at least a map towards how you're going to do this, and then testing it out, you will enable you to, define those use cases as you go. So to take away with you today some use cases, there are certain simple use cases that can be built, of course, whether it comes privilege escalation, remote function calls, exploitation, data. Now, data exfiltration, I put it actually in the simple examples and some advanced examples here, but data exfiltration can definitely be a headache if you don't have the right tools in place or the right technology in place to enable you to understand it. But when it comes to advanced examples, you have your business process fraud, a suspicious ABAP code execution. This becomes quite difficult, or quite difficult to actually start detecting. Due to that, also has something to do with SAP's closed infrastructure when it comes to code execution, data exfiltration, as I said, and some insider threats. So these are use cases that can definitely be broken down to multiple areas. But it's something to think about, something to, challenge me. I'd like a challenge around building those use cases. So in that perspective, a quick note, I have a few slides left. I think I have 5 minutes to go, so we'll run through them. Some proactive measures we try to utilize actually to define threat actors, not just threat actors, but define use cases, define areas, are actual proactive measures to be applied. So we want to assume that this is your network again. This proactive measures is actually defining what I call is called a honeynet. A honeynet is shortly a combination, and you can deploy those development application servers or whatever kind of users around them to see what kind of threats you are able to detect in that perspective. Similar to your enterprise or IT landscape, when you are creating honeypots, when you are creating ports that shouldn't be open but are open, because to determine whether an attacker would touch them. Don't forget that an attacker needs to do discovery, needs to understand the network. So they will definitely hit this honeynet, I would call it, and from there building detection techniques around it. So when it comes, this is quite a very short cyber kill chain. When it comes to reconnaissance, honeypots, if there are there, if you do a network scan or anything and you determine that, okay, there's somebody scanning those ports that have nothing against them, but it's being scanned, so this might be suspicious. Any kind of honey users, creating users that don't exist, or locked users, be careful here with what do you call them, licenses when it comes to SAP. Honeypots, you can define rogue application server, or not just rogue application servers, but utilizing different open source. We have the open source, the core business application security that me and a lot of SAP and non-SAP professionals actually we try to improve and work on, which I'll show you in a bit. And then finally, when it comes to exfiltration, creating tables that, somehow you can see that they might be critical, but there's nothing there. So as I said, remember that the attacker has no idea about your environment, and I'm talking about an external threat here, not an insider threat, unless he's been, given money to tell about. Anyway, but I'm talking about an attacker that needs a lot. If they need to discover, they need to understand what is happening in that perspective. The project here for the open source, I'm pretty sure that you guys have heard about it. The core business application, I hope that you guys have heard about it. Core business application security. And you can, when it comes to the Honey SAP here, you can, when it comes to deception, adversary simulation with PySAP, this is built on top of SCAPI for crafting packets. You have different packets in that perspective. A Metasploit-like, I would say, area here when it comes to the SAP Kiln, and one mostly used is the SAP Attack Surface Discovery. When we are doing actually pen tests, we try to update or try to pull this Docker. It's being updated on a regular basis, quite good area here to discover a lot of different areas when it comes to SAP. And finally, something that we are working on in the community it is around detection engineering. So defining what you have seen in terms of attack flows, attack paths around critical areas that can be utilized in different perspectives. Before I open it up to questions, I have a minute, some takeaways in that instance. And repeating it again, people enablement here is critical. The right questions gives you the right answers, leading to right answers. So ask the right questions in your incident response and investigations. In threat hunting, keep your activities time-bound. You don't want to fall into what also offensive security here calls the rabbit hole. You don't want to dig into something that does not exist. So be realistic with your activities. Do involve, I've seen when an involvement of business application owners or even auditors or even other stakeholders can be quite beneficial when creating use cases that are quite advanced. And as I promised you from the beginning that you need to create, test, tune, and automate and repeat. These are important parts of your entire strategy. We definitely, within the academy here, help different teams and in the advisory help the different areas, cybersecurity or SAP cybersecurity guys within advisory about the team collaboration and so on and so forth. So I'm going to open it up for the last 5 minutes for questions, but I do thank you for